Okay, so hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the Becoming a Management Scientist podcast. I did not do one last week. I actually started a new job and it was a hectic week, and I know I probably should have some of these like pre-recorded, but it is what it is. So this is chapter 6. I will probably actually try to come up with the title for this chapter after I've recorded it. This is going to be a very sensitive subject, a very touchy subject, and I have to go about it in a way that people who are who kind of follow this doctrine, who have a tendency to very much play a victim. I don't want them to feel super attacked, but at the same time, there are things about this specific, I'm talking about a denomination of a church that need to kind of be brought to light. This is actually probably going to be a two-part episode. I know of one guest I'm going to have. I'm hoping it's going to be two, that we are going to go over, our experiences together in this church, what they've been doing in their adulthood since getting out of what we consider the cult. And just kind of looking back on it, how our feelings of what this specific church could have been very detrimental to our health. I won't be naming in this one, I won't be naming the specific church because it's not really just that church. It's really just the denomination that I kind of want to talk about. This is a denomination of a church that the Duggars are part of, and I will also kind of get into that. I will talk a little bit about them and why some of what Josh Duggar has done, even though his has been very public, is something that goes unnoticed in this church. But I'm really going to kind of give not really what my opinion is, but some facts about this church, this specific denomination, not just a singular church. But this specific denomination, I'm going to give some facts about their doctrine. I'm going to, talk about certain people who are not really, who are considered beacons in this specific denomination that are really fostering what they tend to call a culture of abuse. And that's really, looking back on it, that's really what it could have been. Again, this is a very sensitive subject. This is something that, I want to go into. It's not me bashing Christianity. It's opening up a conversation about what it should actually look like. And again, part of this is enlightening about that culture of abuse and how this specific, denomination considers they will protect one of their own, like men, they'll protect it, like Josh Duggar. But if you are someone who is a member of the LGBTQ community, you're going to hell in a handbasket. You're just Satan. It's just, you're the worst thing on the face of the planet, and have become so exclusive that their brand of Christianity is why a lot of people don't want to become a Christian, who don't want to go to church. So this has been a conversation that's been heavy on my mind. I also apologize, guys, if you can hear things. This microphone does pick up a lot, and I think my neighbors are very loud. So I apologize if you can hear anything going on. So where to begin? I'm going to begin with saying that preface this by saying Christianity as a whole is not problematic. It's just certain factors that can be. And I think that the more inclusive they would become, the more likely people would want to practice Christianity, the more likely people would want to know what your church is about. One thing that really kind of what sparked the decision, not only was it, thinking about what the Duggars had done and, with his trial that went on, but there's a podcast that I listened to called the Preacher Boys podcast, and they kind of go in depth into all the things that surround this culture of abuse in the IFB church. So the church, the denomination that I'm talking about is the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church. They do believe in certain fundamental beliefs, which I will get into. They are independent from any affiliation. They don't, like how the Southern Baptist Church belongs to the Southern Baptist Convention. Independent Baptist churches don't believe in that. They don't believe in belonging to that. And when you hear fundamental, it is very much like the fundamental Mormonism. When they say fundamental, it is that, very strict. Their doctrine is very strict. Again, I will go into some of that, but I know I'm kind of all over the place. It is because this is a very touchy subject because it is something that I grew up in. And one thing that happened besides the Duggars was I watched an episode of We're Here, and there was a preacher that decided to go into drag just to walk a mile in some of his congregation's footsteps. And after the show aired, after it all happened, I think he was asked to step down and maybe asked to leave as the pastor of his congregation. And that just brought back a flood of so many, like remembering that the church that I went to used to put up a billboard that said, it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And just this culture of thinking that, being gay was just sodomy and it was horrible and it was the worst thing you could possibly do. And, when being transgender really fully emerged, I hadn't been back to the church in a very long time, so I have no idea how they feel about that. But that was one of the things that really brought this up, because it's a conversation that needs to be held. And I think it was a conversation that they had that, to be a real church and to really practice Christianity and to really practice what Jesus would do is to be inclusive of all groups. And that is not something that happens, especially in this denomination. Now, there are denominations that I've seen, especially here in Charleston, like Anglican, different denominations that have been very open and very welcoming. And that is a good thing to see. Because for me, having some form of spirituality, some form of a higher power means a lot to me. It makes me, realize that maybe we're not alone. But I can't practice a faith that isn't inclusive to everyone. I can't practice a faith that preaches love the sinner, hate the sin, because in reality, that is hating that actual person, because that's their life. We can get into the whole, oh, did they chose to be gay? No, they didn't. They were born with it. You don't wake up one day and decide, oh, I'm going to be gay. It's something that you were born with. It's always been in you. And it's the same with people who are non-binary, the people who are transgendered. It's not for them. It's an awakening of something that's already been deep down inside. It's the realization that I've always been this person. I was just born with different parts. And that is something that this church cannot grasp, cannot get a hold of. And so before I ramble on too much, I will get into some of the things that I remember from being there. I may get more into that in the second part, which probably won't necessarily be next week. I kind of want the second part to be maybe the season finale for this first season of doing this. And I knew it was going to be a long one, so I kind of wanted to start the conversation myself and kind of give my opinion and what I had been through. And then when my guests are on, we can kind of all talk about, different things that happened while we were in the church, and just how I think as adults, if we would have stayed in it, being the way that we are, being as open as we are, it could have done some damage to our mental health. So again, the church that I'm speaking about is the Independent Fundamental Baptist Churches. There are several men who are credited with coming up with this term, and typically they all followed the old evangelists that used to travel around the country, when the country was being built. They typically followed those old, what they call old-timey preachers. The one of the people that is credited with it is John R. Rice. And if I'm not mistaken, I very well could be, had a son or a brother that was Bill Rice, and they had a camp that we used to go to as a church. And I don't want to, claim, oh, it was indoctrinating youth, because at the time that camp was fun. I loved it. It was, it was great to be at. But now when I look back on it, there are some things that just don't mix. There was also another summer camp. I will not mention a lot of these names because I don't want them to try to come for me, and B, again, at the time, I thought they were great. I thought they were fun. It was something that I wanted to do every summer. But now, again, looking back on it as an adult that has formed their own opinions, that has done some factual thinking, looking back on it, it's very indoctrinating. That's all I can say. So the IFB very much believe in the, some of the things they believe in is the doctrine of separation. They also believe that the King James Version is the only legitimate version of the Bible, which has its own issues, because obviously, how do you know it's the complete text? And it's still a version. They believe in a very patriarchal society. The man is the head of the house. The woman is to be submissive. The children are to be submissive to both parents. But it is, the man is the head of the house, and what he says goes. Which again feeds into this huge culture of abuse. So the doctrine of separation basically means that they believe that they have to separate themselves from the rest of the world, because they need to be closer to Christ. in this doctrine of separation, I'm going to look up some of it. I've looked up some of it, and it's a really a very good site. It's called baptistdeception.com. I will definitely credit them in this, but the doctrine of separation is yeah, but they pretty much want to separate themselves from anything that's considered worldly. And in this, they take a lot of different like scriptural passages out of context. And typically, and other denominations do the same thing, but the IFB is 100% notable for taking specific passages of scripture literally, like literally. They take it out of context and they word for word make it literal. And one of the scriptures that it said was in 2 Corinthians, and it talks about being separate and not to touch any unclean things. So basically, when they say unclean things, what we were taught in our youth group, what we were taught in the church was, you don't drink alcohol, you don't listen to any kind of music that isn't gospel music, and that included what is considered contemporary Christian. You don't watch television programs that are, which was pretty much any kind of television program besides maybe Fox News. You didn't go to places where you would commingle with worldly people. Anything that could be considered worldly, you didn't do. They really practice, especially if you were a Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night in the youth group kind of person. They didn't quite go so far as to follow Bill Gothard, which I'll get into too, who said that you should homeschool your kids. A lot of people I know were homeschooled, but they wanted you to go to Christian schools and then on to Christian colleges, specifically places like Bob Jones University. And I actually graduated from a Christian high school, and I went to a Bible college my pretty much first semester of college. But the Bible college that I went to was not approved by our pastor, because even though it had Baptist in the name, they allowed you to use different versions of the Bible, not in classes, but in like your own personal devotions. We'll get into all this too. And so the church thought that that was just not part of the doctrine. So they would sorry guys, I had to pause because my cat is deciding to pull out one piece of food at a time, and this microphone is picking it up. But anyways, so the school that I went to was not approved, and so they basically wouldn't help you like pay for college. They had our youth group was kind of like, the church that I went to had a bus ministry, and a lot of IFB churches do too. I'm not just trying to call out this specific church, I'm trying to base them all. But they had a bus ministry, and they would bring people in to get them into church. And you would think that the doctrine of separation wouldn't include separating people in your own church, because you would want them to come in, you would want them to listen to the gospel, you'd want them to get saved, you would want them to, you know, be a part of the church, all that. No, it was sort of an unwritten, unspoken not rule, but it was written and unspoken that you kind of just didn't really mix. They had separate Sunday school classes. They had separate churches, with the exception of the adults, that they would go into on Sunday. They wouldn't come into the main service with us, but we were not really allowed to go into the teen church or the children's church. We had to go into the main service with our parents. That was what it was. And I don't think I noticed it towards the end of high school. And I think that that's when I started to really kind of break away from this church, because to me, that separation and that, distancing ourselves from those people are probably why these people didn't want to come back. And how we got these people to come to church is another kind of what they believe. They believe in going out on what's called canvassing. I know you guys know that, like, the Mormons will go on a mission and they'll send, when, I guess it's guys and girls, but I think it's pretty much just men, go on this mission. They go around door to door and try to spread, the info on the Latter-day Saints. It's the same for the Jehovah's Witnesses. They go around and they give you their kingdom, whatever it is, kingdom something track. Well, a lot of IFB churches will have what they call canvassing. They go around and they knock on doors. They hand out tracts. And it's not that they're just trying to get you to come to church. They're trying to get you saved. It's not because they're so concerned about whether or not you're going to be eternally damned, and I use that in quotes. They're more concerned about how many people that they can check off on their list that they've gotten to say they're saved. Now, I know a lot of people will just do it just to get you off their porch. They're like, whatever, I'll pray this prayer. I'll do whatever, just get off my porch. Because a lot of times it would be on like a Saturday morning. We would go out and get them so we could get them to come before church, or to come to church on Sunday. But the bad part was, and I know that this is the same for a lot of churches like that, once they get you saved and they get you to come that initial time to church, after that, they really don't care. And, it's that whole like doctrine of separation, because they think, oh, well, a week before this person could have been drinking, and yeah, they're saved now, but we still don't need to associate with them. We got them saved. That's all that matters. And so it was little things like that. And again, it's things like that that make people not want to go to church, that make people not want to come and visit. Too, like when you go out and you canvass, like the tracts that like Mormons and like Jehovah's Witnesses leave kind of paint a better picture versus the tracts that like a lot of Baptist, even Southern Baptist and like missionary Baptists, or I don't really know, Methodists and Presbyterians do this, but the tracts that they leave may look pretty on the front, but on the inside, it's, you're going to hell. You better pray this prayer. I know we aren't completely letting you understand what it means, but Jesus died. Jesus shed all this blood. You better, get saved, ask for his forgiveness, or, you're a horrible person and you're going to hell. Because they are what is called, what a lot of their like doctrine is they call it's pre-rapture and post-tribulationalists. What that means is they believe literal the book of Revelation. They believe that we're living in pre-rapture times, and that, people who are saved after will go up in the rapture. And then once Armageddon has happened and, it's this 1,000-year reign, we'll be here. And then, they believe it literally. And so they preach that like at every turn. There is a specific set of like verses that we are told to read out and give out every time that we go. They call it the Romans road because they want to do it to where children can understand it. And yes, they are trying to indoctrinate and save children. And, I'm not saying that children shouldn't have faith, but I think that there is a better way to go about it than the way some of these churches do. And again, I'm sure if anybody that I know that I went to church and or school with that is still in that whatever is probably gonna absolutely hate this, but damn, I'm speaking my truth. Like, this is how I feel. And I feel better about myself for it, for being more open, for, living how I feel is more like what Christ, but so, yeah, so they do things like canvassing. Where this is going to start getting into this culture of abuse is when you really get into how the church sets itself up. Like, it is very authoritarian. Again, it is very patriarchal. It is also it's never the man's fault. It is always that the woman or even the child has done something to provoke this. There has been something that has caused a man to sin like this, but he should be forgiven. And then it doesn't get talked about anymore. It gets swept under the rug. And that is pretty much what happened with Josh Duggar, especially with what went on with his sisters. His parents swept it under the rug. What's happening now, you see them say, hey, oh, well, we just have to pray for him. He's not guilty. He had numerous amounts, and it wasn't even just porn, it was child pornography that he had on his computer. And they will literally write it off and be like, oh, I guess the devil just got in him, and let's just pray for him. He'll be all right. But they don't ever do anything for the victim. It's like the victim just doesn't matter anymore. Like, it's all about making sure that there's forgiveness for the person who did this. And that really is where this culture of abuse starts. And when I talked about Bill Gothard, he started the Institute and Basic Life Principles, and it was pretty much what the Duggars followed. It was, you, along with that quiverful movement, which is, basically you have as many children as you possibly can because it's what God said to do. Again, taken literally, which is what they like to do. But he basically wanted you to homeschool your children. I believe he actually had a school, and it was somewhere where children were abused. But it was this, again, they were following this strict doctrine that they pulled out of scripture, but they misinterpreted it when they pulled it out of scripture. Again, they took things literally that shouldn't have been taken literally. They, and it's like when people take, when they like to try to use Old Testament verses to talk about being gay, but yet they won't take the literal of where the New Testament was written, so we didn't have to use the Old Testament. It's just, yeah, it's just completely out of context. And it's something that they continually do. And it's something that if you don't follow like their doctrine, or you don't follow exactly what they believe, they've had numerous, like, I know the one church that I went to, and I've known a couple other churches, they've had numerous youth pastors and even a pastor, well, mostly youth pastors, that have left or have been asked to leave because something that they were teaching didn't fall in line. And it wasn't that they were teaching anything bad, but it wasn't as strict as this church thought it should be. So they were asked to leave. And the thing is some of them had been there for years and had gotten such a good rapport with these teens, and they were asked to leave. And it's like, what is going, like, what is happening? Why is this so bad? Like, it makes you start to question things, and that's what they don't want. They don't want you to question anything. They want you to solidly believe what they believe, and they don't want you to question anything. And so when things like if somebody gets divorced, if there is a charge of rape, if there is a charge of abuse toward a child, if that man has been what they thought was an upstanding person in the church, they want to sweep it under the rug because they don't want to believe it. And once it's been brought forth and they've prayed over him, it's like it's gone, and the person can still continue to do it, and they don't follow through. And like, basically the woman or the child is told to keep quiet. And that's a lot of this, like, heartbeat bill and abortion. It's to keep control of a woman by men. That is this whole authoritarian patriarchal society that the IFB has gotten to a T. Like, they have gotten it straight down. And the crazy thing is like, these churches don't believe in, like, they don't believe in things like you have depression, you have anxiety. Again, like, if you had thoughts that if they say you had thoughts that you think you're gay or you're choosing to be gay, they don't believe that it's something that you're born, like, you didn't choose, you just are. And the same with being transgender. They see that as just, like, not part of what they would consider God's perfect plan. And it's when something happens to someone who has been in this church that has, maybe made the decision to leave or has had some issues, they always say, oh, they've lost faith. They gossip a lot. But in the face of it, they're like, oh, we're praying for you. We just love you. We're praying for you. While hiding what's happening in their own homes. But, oh, we're praying for you. You'll find God again. Well, some of us never lost it. We've just realized that what you were selling is not something we should have been buying. And it's taken me probably almost 20 years to really actually get back into a place where I have faith. And I was just disgusted with it for so long because all I could see is the IFB and the way they taught. I could only see that and would just remember like how bad I felt towards the end of high school. Like how bad people made me feel in the beginning of my adulthood because I didn't fit this mold that they had. And I wasn't separated. And for the early part of my 20s, it was something that was very hard because as much as I wanted to go back to church and as much as I wanted to see the people that were at that church that I, had known my entire life, because I had been at this place since I was, a baby. As much as I wanted to see them, I didn't want to step foot in that church because I knew the minute I did, it was just judgment. It was judgment, but in the form of, but we care about you. On the surface, it was, let me show you how much I care. You come back in and you practice our ways and everything will be all right. But deep down, it was, she's not married. She doesn't have kids. She's not in church. She's on the path to go straight to hell, even though I never lost my faith. I had lost a part of it, and it was the part that they had been preaching. It was, I no longer believed the doctrine that they preached. And that was something that they couldn't understand. Like, they can't understand that Christianity as it should be is inclusive, is all encompassing. It's allowing people to be their true self while still accepting them and still allowing them to have their own faith. They can't accept that because they want to cherry pick certain verses of scripture and be like, well, it says right here that they can't do that. It says right here that you shouldn't do this. It says right here that you shouldn't do that. And what I don't understand, and this was another huge part of why I could never go back to that particular church or into that faith, was when the election happened in 2016. Someone that there was a few people that I had grown up with, said that they would rather vote for somebody like Donald Trump, who, by all intents and purposes, by all accounts, was someone who had been married several times, was someone who was an adulterer, was someone who had slept with porn stars. They would rather vote for him because they were afraid Hillary Clinton was going to take away their religion. First of all, and I say this with all conviction, there is no war on your Christianity. Someone living their life the way they want to live it is not a war or an attack on your personal faith. If you believe it is, that is because there is something wrong with you and something wrong with your faith. Plain and simple. Someone being gay does not affect you. And if it does, again, there's something wrong with you. And that is 100% one of the reasons why I could never go back. And it was one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this topic of conversation up. Because as I try to go into these nonprofits that I want to start, as I try to go into helping people, my faith does play a part of it. I've realized more and more, a huge part of me is what I personally believe. Will I ever shove it down someone's throat? Absolutely not. Everyone is entitled to believe what they want to believe. But my belief is what helps me want to be a better person, to help people who maybe can't help themselves. And not in a way that is, hey, look at me, I'm helping someone. It's because I genuinely want to help people. It's because I genuinely feel like if I had been in that position, I would have wanted somebody to help me too. You know, for a very long time after stopping going to this church, I had to dig myself out. And yeah, I may have lost a little bit of my faith, but the part that I lost was every piece of doctrine from the IFB churches. And I'm 100% better for it. I mean, their whole patriarchal culture, it's, them believing that women can't do anything. Like, you're meant to serve your husband. You are able to be a teacher. You're able to be a Sunday school teacher. You don't stand up in church. You don't pray while there are men in the room. And it's no. I mean, no. And like, I remember even as a youth, like, I wanted to either be a Supreme Court justice or I wanted to be the first female president. And surprisingly, the youth pastor that I had never doubted it, which was surprising. Again, because of this culture. But I think deep down, a lot of the men from the church, if I had said it, would have just been like, well, you can't do that. You can't do that. You're female. You can't be in charge of men. And again, that's what separates, like, why people don't want to join this particular denomination and maybe don't even want to join Christianity, is because of thinking like this. And, again, to bring it up again, because it needs to continue to be a topic of conversation, is that culture of abuse. Because these people who are the people getting abused need to have an outlet. And though I may not have firsthand experience in this, I do know people who it's happened to, and they maybe are starting to find their voice, but maybe they don't have that platform. And if I can use this platform to help talk to them or help get their story out or help it to be noticed, then that's what I'm going to do. Because no one deserves to have the abuse that they are suffering at the potential hands of a family member be swept under the rug because this patriarchal culture in the church. And for it to never be, for the man to never be at fault, it's got to stop, because it's going to continue to happen, and you're going to continue to end up having, teens who get pregnant by members of their own family, who can't have an abortion because now there's a new law in place. And, again, it really took me, I really was not 100% sure that I wanted to do this topic. And, I will hopefully still have two guests, or at least one guest, that will come on and also give their view on this and how they got out of it and how they grew up. But it's very much, I think it was something that needed to be said, because it's something that if there's somebody out there who's listening who is a member of even maybe not just this denomination, just going through any of that, just know that, your voice should be heard. And if I can in any way, shape, or form help your voice be heard, then please, I will leave my email address on here. Please feel free to contact me, because it shouldn't be swept under the rug. And if you are someone whose mental health has been, detrimented, just in a terrible, terrible place, because of, churches like this, and you don't think that you can get help, notice that you can. Even if your entire family has been part of this church or this, denomination or any denomination, you're not going to lose your spirituality or your faith by leaving. You're probably going to be better off for it, and you're going to be able to find a better outlet for your spirituality. What's funny is, there for a long time, there was this whole, movement of what would Jesus do with the bracelets? And yeah, I had it too. But it would definitely not be this. It would definitely not be sweeping it under the rug. It would definitely not be letting them get away with anything. It would definitely not be excluding members of the LGBTQ community. It would not be this doctrine of separation. It would be welcoming to everyone. It would be love. And I think that part of the reason why the people who are at churches like this or in this IFB culture don't want to accept that is because somehow they want to feel spiritually superior to everyone else. And what's funny is there was an actor who I never would have thought that this would have come out of their mouth. There was an actor who was using, in the Bible, there's this, Jesus goes to the temple and he sees the Pharisees, and they have tables and they're selling wares or they're trying to collect money. And he turns over all the tables and basically says, this isn't the place to do this. Well, he used that example to push his anti-mask and anti-vax belief. Like, oh, well, if Jesus was here and he was there in Congress while they're trying to make this anti-vax, he would have turned over all the tables. And that is 100% not true. Because getting a vaccination or wearing a mask not only helps you, it helps other people. And that's really what Jesus was preaching, is to love your neighbor, is to be kind to others, is to do things to help the people who can't help themselves in the end. And I think that that's something that a lot of churches have, not only have they forgotten it, but they have, unless it does something to show how good they're doing, they don't want to do it. And again, this is 100% why people, A, might leave the church, and B, don't want to practice religion or don't want to go to church, is because this spiritual superiority complex that they have. And I just, this has been something that, I very much wanted to talk about a lot of, because of, what's gone on in the media with the Duggars. Like, it's high profile for him because he was on a TV show. But in reality, it's probably not as uncommon as you think. And the only reason I singled out, not only because I grew up in that church or that denomination, one of the reasons why I singled out this denomination is because it is one of the most problematic. It is one that would foster this, again, the culture of abuse, but in more ways than one. They are the people who would think that if stoning were still whatever, there's that story in the Bible that where Jesus says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And they would all think that they could cast that stone because they have a spiritual superiority complex. And it's sad because there are a lot of people that I know that are still in that and still practice that. And I can't be around them because what they preach is like love and spirituality and Christianity is just hate. It's a lot of hatred because that's what they do. It's exactly what they do. So this is just been something that's been weighing heavily on my mind, and hopefully in a couple of weeks, a week or two, I'll get a sort of second part of this up. Really, hopefully will maybe be the season finale to this first season of this podcast with 2 guests one to two guests who were also part of this church, who want to give their opinions too about, what made them finally realize, like, thank goodness we got out of here. Even though we all have family who are still a part of it. We all have parents who are still a part of it. It's just, I've had to learn that my identification of faith is valid and is just as right, if not more right, than theirs. I didn't want to walk on eggshells. I did, but I didn't. Because again, I know people that are still in that, and I'm sure that I'm going to get some form of hate, or, they'll send some form of hate to my mom, and that ain't happening. Because the minute it goes to her, that's when I will end up letting loose everything. And that's not an attack on religion. That's just an attack on people who are playing a victim that aren't really a victim. But so that is, pretty much the conclusion of this one. Like I said, I'll have the episode with them probably be the last one. But hopefully I'm going to do an episode on mindfulness with a friend of my friend Renee, who was on here, who's getting their PhD, I believe, in the study of, which is really cool. And I'm also going to do an episode on a social construct where, gender is a social construct, and how we should be more mindful of pronouns and the way people want to be addressed, that kind of thing. So, well, guys, that is it for this episode into the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church. If you really want to hear kind of into more detail, go listen to the Preacher Boys podcast, because it is, they really get into it, and it's a very good podcast. But I will end it there, and I will see you guys next week.